We go. Hey everyone, this is Micah, founder of Fluency Corp, here with John Cormier, and for all my French fanatics, Cormier, because
Robert
this is a language. Yeah. And Robert, tell us who you are with really quickly before we dig into your expat chat story.
Great. So, I'm Robert Cormier. I'm with Paramount Transportation Systems. I'm based in Raleigh, North Carolina, and live in Cary, North Carolina.
Wonderful. And you were just telling me, how long have you been there? Is this the longest you've been in one place?
It is getting close, actually. We've been here for just over 9 years now.
Amazing.
And
so I'm going to start at the beginning. Can you tell us what your first expat move was?
Okay. Well, maybe just to even lead into that, because I think obviously the expat moves were just another step in being a global nomad. But it all started in my mind is when I made that move from a small paper mill town in Massachusetts, about 40 miles outside of Boston. I just made that little domestic move from the name of the city is Fitchburg, Massachusetts.
I know it.
You do? Wow.
I lived in Boston 10 years.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay. Well, I moved to Boston for university. So it was, into my own place, moving out of the house. And that was a little bit of a step in experience, but that just gave me a little bit of an itch to go a little further and not be afraid to try something different. So I kind of took the opportunity while in grad school to take a break and decided I wanted to maybe I wanted to be a pilot. So pursue that from the West Coast instead of the East Coast. And so I packed up a car and drove to Southern California. So left school, I was working in a law firm for a few months and then decided that wasn't it either. So when I made that move to California, I needed a job, and I needed a job quick to live in California, obviously.
Yeah, you can't get there. You can't coast for too long there.
No, and I did have a sister that had moved out there, about I think 10 years before.
Oh, nice.
So she gave me a place to crash for a couple of weeks until I kind of get myself established. And I was fortunate in finding a job quickly, and that was as a bartender, which is what I did in college. And I was pursuing taking flight lessons and bartending for a little over a year. And then there was a conference happening that year down in San Diego for the household goods moving industry. At the time, it's now called the International Association of Movers, and they have a conference every year, and it's in different locations. So in this particular year, this is 1991, it was down in San Diego. So I was fortunate because one of the owners of a company based in Saudi Arabia, his name was Mohammed Almani, was staying in the hotel where I was bartending. It was the Hyatt Regency in Long Beach. And so as he was staying in the hotel, I find out from him because he would come down and sit at the bar and have one beer every afternoon when I was setting up. And we had a good conversation every time he'd come to the bar. And by the end of the week, he knew where I went to school, a little bit about my background, where I was from. And we had really good conversations and we laughed. And in the end of the week, he said in his accent, Robert, I would like to hire you and bring you to Saudi Arabia. And
oh my God, that's crazy.
I thought at the time, which you're too young to remember, but that was during the first Gulf War.
Oh, wow.
1991. So it was kind of one of those moments where you're given an opportunity, and I didn't know whether it was real or not. I just met this guy, but he basically said, yeah, I've been interviewing people all week at job fairs, and I really, after meeting many young Americans, I want to hire one, but I think you're the best person that could come work for us.
Amazing.
So I was like, okay. Well, I went home that night and just slept on it. And it's just one of those decisions that you make in your life, which worked out extremely well, of course, at this stage of my life and career. And I was very fortunate because I said yes to that. And I took that opportunity and I got on a plane. I basically sold everything that I owned, and I reduced my entire life down to 2 suitcases. I had no shipment allowance. So I had 2 suitcases, basically with a promise that I had a job and a place to live and everything in Saudi Arabia. So it was.
How old were you?
I was 25.
Oh my gosh. It's almost the same time that I took my relocated job too. Where did you go to school?
I went to Suffolk University in Boston.
Okay. I went to BU. I had to ask. So interesting. Okay.
I lived in Brighton. I lived in Brighton for a couple of years.
And I was right there, right before Ulster, like in the BU dorms. Yep.
Wow. See,
amazing. It is. Okay, so you have 2 suitcases. Someone bought you a ticket to Saudi Arabia. There's a war going on nearby. You're flying closer to the war. And they said, we'll give you a house. You'll have a job. I don't even know what the job is.
And honestly, I didn't know either, other than the fact that I was going to be in sales. So
okay, I knew what my job at least was going to be in Mexico. Okay, it was sales. So you had an idea and you knew what you were going to be selling. Yes?
Right.
Okay.
Yep. And, I had no experience in that, but that didn't seem to sway him. He thought, he'd rather work with a clean slate and train and teach me on the industry. And he had a very well-established company in Saudi Arabia. So I went into Jeddah. And I mean, honestly, I got on that plane, and even up to that point, first of all, my mother was going to kill me when I told her.
Absolutely. Same response. Yep. I just told you earlier. I was like, oh yeah, don't mention danger in Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a scary
When did
time.
you tell her?
That was the first thing. Well, when I first told her, it was over the phone, and she screamed at me. So I held the phone out here for a few minutes until she kind of calmed down.
Yeah.
And then I had to give her the, don't worry, Mom. I did all the research. It's a very good company. It's, I'm all set. It's going to be safe and everything else. I had no clue, zero. So it was a total, crapshoot on my part.
Wow.
But I just had a good feeling on like the guy and the situation. And honestly, I thought my pursuit of being a pilot in the military wasn't really going forward the way I wanted it to. So I thought, why not give this a try? And if somebody's willing to make that investment in me, then I'm going to go ahead and give it my best, So I did it. I got on that plane and I landed in New York, and sure enough, I went to the Saudia desk where he had told me a ticket would be waiting for me, and there was a ticket waiting for me. So I was relieved at that point, but still, the anxiety of having to travel the first time that you're traveling overseas, until you get there and really see what you're stepping into, it was definitely a lot of anxiety, I think leading up to it. So needless to say, I didn't sleep on that flight going over, and I arrived in Jeddah, and he was there waiting for me and picked me up at the airport. So that was good. He took me straight to his house to meet his son, who now actually runs the company.
Wow.
Mr. Almani actually passed away just a couple of years ago, but his son that I met that day, who was just this little guy, was really cute. But I met him that first night in Saudi Arabia, and then we had a cup of tea, and then he took me to my accommodations. So he dropped me off my two suitcases and gave me the keys and said, okay, go through the gate and you're in house number 4. So I thought, okay, great, thanks. And he was going to pick me up at 7 a.m. Now at this time, it's about 11 o'clock at night. I am exhausted, just ready to go in and crash.
You didn't sleep.
So I did not sleep. And it had been, I don't know, so by that point, probably been like 36 hours or something. And And so I get into the apartment, I open up the gate, and it's a trailer park. So sure enough, I'm in trailer number 4, and the keys worked. I opened the door, and there was shag carpeting from the 70s and dust everywhere. There was
What year was this?
dishes. This is in 1992, in January of 1992.
And still with the shag.
Yes, and so there was dirty dishes in the kitchen. The bed hadn't been made. Yes, so it was nasty. Nobody thought to go in and clean this place. So
Oh my
God. I scrambled and figured out did as much cleaning as I could, because I mean obviously I had to do the sheets and everything. So I don't remember how I figured it out, but I found the laundry machines in this trailer park and did the sheets. Went in and vacuumed, did the kitchen, basic cleaning, got the sheets, made the bed, crashed. Guess what time it was?
By the time you went to bed? 4
o'clock. So I thought, all right, I got a couple hours sleep, and then he's going to pick me up at 7. No problem. God. First day, I'll sleep the next day, right?
That's rough.
And so I crashed, and then I am so rudely awakened by what I thought was an air siren, which was actually the first prayer call in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, I mean, you knew nothing. Talk about the lack of culture training was certainly not what you were thinking of.
Yeah. This is long before cross-cultural training, or certainly any language training. So,
oh yeah. Okay, so what did you think? When did you realize what it was?
It took me about a minute. I was on the floor on all fours, thinking that there was bombs coming in.
That's so scary.
And then I laughed because I heard the song come out of his mouth, and it was a speaker right outside the trailer park that was projecting into the trailer park. So, anyways, that was my first day in Saudi Arabia, and a little bit of a cultural experience, of course. But it was a great first experience. So 2 years in Saudi Arabia, and then returned to the States, and went back to San Diego, or back to LA, and started working for a French company.
Okay.
And over the course of I was there for about 3 years. Over the course of the 3 years, I opened an office for them down in San Diego. And that's when I was crossing the border into Mexico, doing maquiladora business.
Yes.
And it was kind of more on the freight forwarding side, but, still transportation.
Yeah.
So after a few years, honestly, that 2-year experience being overseas, it was calling for me to do something again internationally. And I think that happens to a lot of people once you experience it and you get over, that initial, I guess, hesitation about leaving everything that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
It becomes a bit of an addictive thing, is learning new cultures and
I agree,
languages and everything too. So I felt the calling, and then over the course of the 3 years, I had gotten married, and so had to consider my wife and her career and everything as well. But I got sign in from her, and we kind of opened it up to look what opportunities were out there. And I got a job with a company that I stayed with for 17 years, which was Santa Fe Relocation Services.
How many years?
17. So
wow, Robert.
They were headquartered in Hong Kong, so I moved initially to Hong Kong.
I did not know that was the headquarters.
Yeah, well, it was. Over the years, it moved to London because of acquisitions. And
okay, that makes sense.
And that was over the years that I was there. I mean, it was a great experience. Yeah. So we had 11 years.
I want to talk. I want to ask a lot about the Hong Kong move, because this was with your wife. This was with a partner, correct?
Right.
And what's her name, so that I can say her name?
Beverly.
Okay, so let's focus on Hong Kong for a second. So I would like to know how you guys prepared for that move, because it doesn't sound like for Saudi Arabia, I can't ask these questions because there was no prep, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I was like, I think it's going to be a moot point for Saudi Arabia, any of my questions, because that was like a fly by the seat of your pants, life-changing decision. And then, so let's talk about Hong Kong. So you're with someone else, you got to decide with someone else. What was the preparation for that? If you can talk about that.
Well, it's a great question. And I really think that my wife, fortunately, had really traveled herself. She
Oh,
did the
great. Where had she gone? Tell us about
she
her a little.
she hadn't lived overseas, but she wanted to live in France, and she spent quite a bit of time in Europe, traveling around Europe and then in France.
Wonderful. That's very
So
helpful. So you both had a little bit of a wanderlust?
mhm, that's right. And so when I found out about an opportunity in Hong Kong, the first step was just to get her to kind of be in agreement that we can look at it, right, and see what the opportunity is. And I was very fortunate. And I think a lot of companies hadn't done that back then, but they
Mhm.
flew me to Hong Kong to do a face-to-face interview and basically do
Oh,
kind
great.
of a look-see trip, which
Exactly.
I think honestly that money is so well spent in
Good to know.
trying to determine whether an individual is the right fit. And it doesn't give you 100% accuracy, but I think it really helps to maybe at least eliminate those individuals that are going to have a real challenge moving and living overseas.
It allows you to
So,
kind of see their first impressions and reactions before the hiring, right?
right. Yeah. Yeah. And how they transition. I mean, obviously, the cultural differences going from the United States to Hong Kong, or even if it was that was the year that was in 1997. So that was the year that the UK handed Hong Kong back to China.
Oh,
So
wow.
so that was an interesting time in Hong Kong, and there was a lot of companies that were very nervous about what was going to happen once the
Yeah.
Chinese kind of took control. And so it was an interesting time to be in Hong Kong, but at the same time, it was an exciting time, in my
Yeah.
opinion. And it really hadn't changed. For many years, I think in Hong Kong, it was basically operated the same way that it had been for many years while under British um, control. So, anyways, that trip really kind of cemented the fact that it was a good opportunity for me.
Yeah.
So the decision when I got back was quite easy. Beverly was all in, like a great adventure, exciting.
Oh, I like her already.
Yeah. So I'm very lucky in that way because I mean, a lot of people would definitely not be so agreeable on that. It's a big change,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
Leaving family, and her family did live at the time in Southern California, so she would be leaving, her family. So,
absolutely. So
but
for you, people should go and check it out before moving. Yes? Must have.
I w- I would always recommend that
Yeah.
I mean, if you can do it, if
Yeah.
if you want to take your spouse, and if you have school age children, I would even go that far. And I'll tell you a little bit about that next move when we did have school age children.
Exactly. Yeah. I want to get a good, yeah, 20 minutes for that one as well. Um, so for that one, and again, I just like people to hear these tips. So go and see it. And then I've heard, about these assessments of how successful people will be making a move like this. And
Mhm.
do you know like what I don't know if you guys move a lot of people, like what things do you look at to see if the relocation will stick or if they'll be successful there? We hear a lot about failed relocations and
Mhm.
wanting to avoid that. It's very costly. So how do it starts with choosing the right person, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And any tips for that?
Well, I think for me, it was probably a little bit easier than a lot of other people, just because I had already had an international experience, right?
Yep. You're not too
So
risky.
not that risky.
Yeah.
And I honestly think that the only way to establish, whether somebody is suitable, and there's all kinds of online platforms where you can do, self evaluation tests, and you can kind of
Yeah.
quiz somebody where it gives you some percentage of how successful they'll be or whether they're suited for a position. But honestly, I don't think that has gotten to the point or the level at this stage where I would really rely on that wholly. I think a lot of it is a gut feeling just based on having met and seen so many families relocate over the 30 years plus that I've been in this industry. So for companies, I think the best way that you can actually establish that is by firstly sending somebody to that destination where you intend to send them to work.
Yeah.
Have them meet with key stakeholders in that destination so that there's the personal relationship, that they have an opportunity during that look-see trip to establish a little bit of a relationship with those individuals they're going to be working with, whether it's an HR person or a combination of your key stakeholders, but have them meet. And then after they have that meeting and that trip is completed where they've had time with each of these individuals, and I think a lot of that impression will be established outside of the work environment. So if you go out and have dinner and you have a couple of drinks with an individual, you get to know them, you peel away the layers a little bit, and everyone can put up a great first impression and maintain that, professional, I guess, appearance when you're in that work environment. But then once you let your guard down a little bit, you get you can peel away the layers and see how that individual really feels about the situation, the opportunity, and everything. So you let it kind of just happen the way that it naturally will happen. But I think on the tail end of that trip, you kind of get some feedback from those key stakeholders. I mean, I can tell you that I did it while we were in Hong Kong. Some of our corporate accounts would have us do what we call the look-see trip for the professionals that were coming out. So as a service provider, as like a relo provider for that corporation, we would have the opportunity to just set up a day trip with that individual. And we would always end it with a dinner at night. We'd probably take them on a junk trip to an island and have a seafood dinner or something. But at the end of our time with them, we would also go back and just give some honest feedback on our impression, right?
That's nice. That's a plus.
And you're getting a third party to just give their open, without any, you don't have to put any weight on it or whatever, but it's just our opinion. And our opinion carried a lot of weight simply because, we experience a lot of failed assignments, right? Yeah. We're moving people back out of Hong Kong that should have never been there in the first place.
Yeah.
And for a myriad of reasons. I mean, it could be just, it's not the individual, the working person, it's the trailing spouse. It's the family, the children. If you're moving children that are in their teen years, so high school age, we kind of looked at it like 11 or 12 years old. It's not that it won't work. It's just, it's going to be more of a challenge. And as a parent, are you really ready for that? And whether you're ready or not, it could have an effect on the assignment, on the individual's productivity. I mean, if their family's not happy and they're miserable and it's ongoing, then it's certainly going to affect the person's work as well.
Yes, I have a 1.5-year-old, and I'm kind of like, all right, I got a good 6 years to go a little crazy with the traveling, and then we need to stay put. Yeah, I agree with you. It's not impossible, like you said, but it needs to be greatly taken into consideration how challenging that might be.
Right. And I'll share a little bit of that with the moves that we had after.
Exactly. Okay. To be continued with what our opinions are with the kids. Good.
Exactly. Okay. So that time in Hong Kong, honestly, I really think that little look-see trip that I took really helped a lot.
Were you there about a week?
It was probably only about 4 days. It was like a long weekend. I think it was a Thursday to a Sunday or Thursday to a Monday or something.
Perfect. Okay, that's good for people to know. It doesn't necessarily need to be an entire week. It was very effective. I mean, that's a long flight, right? And then it was maybe 4 nights.
It was 4 nights,
Okay.
and every day I was getting together with different people from within the organization. So I had a chance to kind of meet the people that would be reporting to me. I also met obviously the CEO and the
Yeah.
COO. So I spent really, and that's what I really appreciated too. I think if a company is going to make an investment to bring a more senior level person into an organization overseas, then you want 100% buy-in from those stakeholders, being the people who are managing that office that
Yeah.
person is going to be reporting to, or on the flip side, the people that are going to be reporting to that individual. If you bring
Oh, yeah.
somebody in and they don't have any synergy, then it can be an issue as well. So
Yeah.
I really think that it was a very smart move for the company to do that, and it all worked out great because I went back and Beverly was on board, and so we kind of went through that exercise where I didn't have to sell everything this time. We were actually able to send a 20-foot container with our household goods, in our house.
Yay.
That was kind of nice. Yeah.
Absolutely. I did my Mexico trip with one suitcase as well, so I really feel you.
Ah,
Um,
there you go.
yeah, that's what we have when we're 25.
Yeah.
We
And
can
you
make
don't
it
need anything, right?
do. So I have a question I love asking people. What did you expect when moving to Hong Kong that didn't turn out to be so?
Hmm. What did I expect that did not turn
Yeah, like,
out
oh,
to
I
be?
think they're gonna be like this, and you're like, ah, they weren't like that at all. Or I thought they wouldn't be so, but they were.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I really thought that there would be some issue with the language barrier
Yeah.
with Cantonese, and where I had no knowledge of Cantonese at the time. And
It's a monster of a, yeah, to learn for an English speaker. Yeah.
right, so I mean, it was similar in Saudi Arabia, I can tell you,
Oh,
but
Arabic and yeah, and Cantonese are right on the same difficulty for English speaker scale.
that's right. That's right. So it was a challenge in some respects, but once you learn basic words, you could get past those challenges. Like we called it taxi Cantonese. So you learn
Nice.
taxi Cantonese. So you can
Like
get into a
directional
taxi.
Cantonese.
Those guys didn't speak any English, and
Yeah.
you just needed to get around. So you knew all the left, right, straight, what street names were, the basic information that you needed to navigate the city, and that pretty much got us where we needed to go in terms of the language. And I mean, had we really focused on it, I'm sure we could have picked up Cantonese, but English is just so widely spoken there.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, I recently had a meeting with people who got 5 contracts in Saudi Arabia and they were panicking that they needed to learn Arabic. And I said, why? Same thing. If
Yeah.
it's not always necessary. So,
No.
yeah, I mean, you were working in English.
Yeah, that's right. And that's, it depends on the language of the industry, right?
Yeah,
So like in our industry, people typically won't relocate if they can't speak whatever the native tongue is for that destination, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it
Or
served you to
English.
learn the basics.
Yeah. Or English, right? If they spoke English and their mother tongue, then they could get by anywhere else in the world with that. So yeah, it was a great experience. Like in Saudi Arabia, I did take intensive Arabic for 6 months, and so
Wow.
I could speak it well enough to be a translator between the U.S. military and the Saudi drivers that we hired that didn't speak any English.
Well, that's
So,
incredible, Robert. So you got to taxi and basics of 2 languages then.
well, yeah, that was a long time ago, so I
Yeah,
can't remember anything other than
I
all
understand.
the greetings and everything else. I think I've still got it somewhere in that memory, but yeah, if you don't practice the language, then of course you're going
Yeah,
to lose it. Um, but
absolutely. Um,
but Beverly, I thought that she would have some challenges, and to be honest,
yeah.
she did in some respects, just because my wife was she was born in the Philippines, and
Oh, how long was she
it,
there?
she was there for 4 years, and then her
Wow.
father was in the military and was in Vietnam and everything.
So she's American, born in the Philippines.
Right. Well,
Okay.
both her parents are Filipinos, so they're naturalized.
Whoa!
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Amazing.
but when he got into the military during Vietnam, into the Navy, he relocated the family to California.
Wow.
So she was raised in California. So, but
Amazing.
her appearance is definitely Filipino. And
Sure.
in Hong Kong, there's a pretty large Filipino community there, but in Hong Kong, the majority of the Filipinos there are actually working as domestic helpers.
That makes
So,
sense. Yeah.
so I think that was a little bit of a challenge for her because she would be mistaken as a domestic helper every time somebody would talk to her, and they would say things like, "Is your boss home?"
Oh, like
Something
that,
like that.
she's answering the door and she's not the homeowner, they think.
Right. So it's like an immediate assumption that
Immediate. Yep.
people would make, and and I think she was a little bit stunned by that, and not that there's anything wrong with being a domestic helper, but for somebody to assume that you're a domestic helper, without really knowing, then I think it maybe
Well,
can be a little bit.
I think being assumed you're anything, if it's never been assumed before, is, I'm not, again, like you're saying, this isn't necessarily racism. This isn't necessarily, but it's putting you in a box that you didn't even know existed. Right.
Mhm. Right.
And if it's never happened to you before, it's weird the first time.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
It's
that
like,
was the reaction.
yeah.
I remember it was definitely a bit of a challenge for her to
Yeah.
understand that people aren't trying to be like insult her or anything like that, or
Yeah.
but yeah, once you're there for a while, you understand a little bit of the reasoning behind what people making those assumptions. Not that they should make them, but you know
You understand why they might. Yes,
right,
because maybe 95% of the people that look a certain way are domestic helpers. And so,
right.
yeah. Yeah, I completely get it. I do. Um and then what did you, well, example is what you just gave. What did you not expect to happen that did happen? Being
Right.
assumed. Yeah, being assumed something. Anything from your side that you didn't expect to happen that was a bit of a surprise?
Yes. And if you don't mind, I'll tell a short story about
I love stories. That's how we learn. Yes.
an example of how that happened. And you might recall the story. You were in Las Vegas, right, for that. So it's kind of going back to that story, but it really does relate to the topic that you're mentioning. So when I first arrived, I would be the first one in the office every day, 7 o'clock in the morning. I'd be
Yeah.
in there, and the heat in Hong Kong, like in September, it's still basically summertime in Hong Kong, right? So it was quite warm. And like on a Monday morning, as an example, they wouldn't turn the air conditioning on until 8. So 7 o'clock in the morning, when you go to the office and they haven't turned the air conditioning on yet, and it's been off all weekend, it is steamy in the office.
So it's not
So
like the US where it's always on, even if the building is empty.
no, no, that's right.
Always.
But that's not really the story. But I'd be there at 7, and I go in and I make my own instant coffee in the tea room, they called it, where they
Nice.
had like a refrigerator and whatever for the employees of the office. And
Yeah.
so I'd make my tea, and this is in Hong Kong back in 1997. They still had a tea lady working in the office.
Oh.
So the tea lady would kind of do a little bit of cleanup and things, but also make tea for the management at the office. So in this case, I didn't qualify as management. She would only make it for the CEO and the COO in the morning. So she'd be there at 7 o'clock, and as soon as they were in, she was in there making her, the tea or the coffee for the bosses. and I'd go in to make my own cup, and she'd talk to me in Cantonese. She didn't speak one word of English. Little old Chinese lady. She's really nice, happy. Just she was very small. I think she probably was 4'8" or something.
Oh, wow.
And so she smiled and talked to me in Cantonese, and I'd say, "Good morning to you too, and how are you today?" And she would answer me in Cantonese, and we'd go back and forth, and it was a bit of a ritual. So it was funny. And one day, it's probably 3 months had passed, and we've gone through this, and it just so happens that one of the Chinese Canadian co-workers that I worked with was in the office when I was in there having this back and forth with the tea lady. And so I said from the tea room across the office, I said, "Susan." She said, "Yeah, what is Dai Fei Lo?" And there was a pause. And then she said, "Big fat guy." So she had been calling me big fat guy in Cantonese every day for the last 3 months. And I looked at the tea lady after Susan said big fat guy. I looked at her and she smiled and pointed at me.
Because she knew what you were asking, because she heard you say it. Dai Fei Lo.
Yes. So that would be something that I didn't expect. And that is that the Hong Kong Chinese people will be completely honest with you, irregardless of whether in our country or our culture, it would be insulting to say something like that.
Absolutely.
They would say it to each other. I mean, two ladies would say, "Oh, it looks like you put on weight." Things like that, where you would never say that in a
and it's more factual, right? To them, it's not an offensive thing. It's you've put on weight. Like I see a change in you.
Yeah. No, that's right. And that's a cultural thing, to be honest.
Totally.
I wasn't prepared for, but I honestly didn't have any issue with it. I thought it was really funny as well. So my nickname was Dai Fei Lo, of course, going forward.
And it's culturally funny because like you're not fat. Like but yeah, like
I was a big guy in that office, I can tell you.
Oh, exactly. I was gonna say, how tall are you? People can't tell.
I'm 6 feet. I'm not that tall, but in Hong Kong, I was a giant.
Oh, it's huge though. She was 4'8". Yeah. No, it's very, very similar in Mexico. I don't know if you know that, but when you were working with the maquiladoras, like baldy, fatty, shorty, those are the names they called each other, right?
Yeah, that's right.
No one's offended. And there's a woman that I never really got to talk to, and someone told me, "Oh, they kept hearing her say la grandota, la grandota, la grandota." And finally someone was like, "Oh yeah, she's talking about you." And I was like, "What do you mean she's talking about me?" I mean, I spoke enough Spanish. And they're like, "Oh yeah, everyone calls you the big one." I'm 5'8", so I'm huge as a woman there.
Wow.
Huge. Because I was in the Yucatan, so all Mayans.
Wow.
The men were like, a tall man was 5 foot.
Oh my God.
So I was enormous. So yeah, I was the big one. And yeah, here we would be offended, right? And like my sensibilities changed that year and a half because you had to get over it.
Yeah.
So anyway, totally get it. It's just not offensive. Yeah.
Right. So that was one of the nicknames. The other nickname that I got was Ah Chu, because I sneezed all the time. I had allergies.
I was like, a sneezing?
Yeah. So I thought that was very funny. I mean, just the fact that they would have nicknames for each other, and it wasn't only me, obviously.
Did you hear anybody else's nicknames during this time?
Oh. Yeah, one of the guys I think was Roly Poly or something.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, these are rough.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. I mean, I think it was definitely a good working environment, and I thought, if that's something that people could include as part of your cross-cultural training, it would be really helpful, because think about it, Micah, if somebody goes to Hong Kong and they have that real sensitive personality, they're self-conscious of something, They are sensitive. They don't take criticism very well. There's a lot of people that fall in that category that
Yeah.
will have serious issues. And I mean, it could affect that whole, if they're managing a team and somebody on their team says something that isn't meant to be offensive, it could affect, that relationship. And so it really does make a difference that people understand this going into an environment like that.
So I want to transition so that we can really talk about the kids and how that worked. So where'd you go from there, or where did you move with the kids? I know you had 3, but tell me where you guys moved together.
So we had 3 kids in Hong Kong while living there, and we didn't have them right away. We had traveled a bit around Asia. My wife was working full time for Deloitte. She had a really good job, and
Nice.
And so everything was going well, and we were traveling and seeing Asia. But then we decided it was time to have kids. So in 2002, we started with our first, and proceeded to have 2 more. So we had 3 kids while in Hong Kong. And after the 3rd child, I think maybe about 3 or 4 months into it, we realized that our 3rd child was having some allergies. They were starting to have some allergies where our oldest was already on an inhaler, and we were thinking that it was kind of the air quality in Hong Kong.
Do you think that's what it was?
Yeah, so we weren't 100% sure, and the doctors actually wouldn't tell us that that was what it was.
Huh.
So I was in a fortunate position at that time with the company that I could relocate and work from anywhere in the role that I had.
Wonderful.
Because it was a global position, and so I decided, for the sake of the family, I'm going to try to move them into a cleaner environment.
Okay.
And so we decided that Singapore was a great location for us. We had a big office there. The air quality definitely was much better. And I could easily travel from that location as well. So that was a big move for us, because, going from just the 2 of us to now 5 of us making that relocation definitely took a lot more consideration. And once again, though, to be honest, I think that's where it was important for us to do a look-see trip, go over there and look at the schools, look at the housing situation. Is it going to be a good move for us from a family perspective? And our oldest at that time was just going in, I think was in the 1st grade in the British school system.
Okay.
In Hong Kong.
That was what I was going to ask. In Hong Kong, they were in the British school system. They weren't doing Cantonese.
They were taking Mandarin.
Okay.
She was in Mandarin from the age of 2 at the preschool. They start very young there at 2.
But that makes sense. They really need it.
Yep, that's right. Well, I mean, she was in language training for Mandarin, not Cantonese, which is interesting. But Mandarin, most of the schools feel that that's a more beneficial language to learn, because only people in Hong Kong and southern China speak Cantonese.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So,
more useful.
Right. So that's kind of the direction we took, where we wanted the kids to learn Mandarin while they're there. I mean, it was, they're sponges, they'll pick it up.
Mm-hmm.
So she was in the 1st grade, and we decided when we go to Singapore, we're going to bring her with us and take her on some of the school visits.
So she's about 6.
She's about 6, exactly. Okay. And so we actually did that. We took her with us. We were there for probably similar, 5 days, 6 days. Visited quite a few schools, looked at some properties, got a good feel for that environment, and decided it was a good move for us.
Nice.
And so got back and packed everything up and made that transition to Singapore with the 3 kids. And obviously the other 2 were too young, so they didn't really,
give their opinion.
Yeah, they weren't going to be an issue to relocate as long as everyone else, the family, was there. So. And
did you choose Singapore in order to stay in the time zone, because you weren't changing jobs per se, or did you change jobs and you were now going to work in the office in Singapore? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so actually it was the same job. It was a group role that I had.
Okay.
And so it wasn't a change of a job or anything. It was just strictly family decision to make that move. Um, and so I think it was the right decision for us as a family.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, I can tell you, Mika, that within 6 months, my daughter stopped using the inhaler. So,
What, as a parent, what a sigh of relief.
I mean, she still has allergies, but she doesn't have to, use the inhaler every day. And it's not something like throughout that whole period. Every once in a while, if she went out and she was, playing soccer or something, she might
Yes.
have to use the inhaler, but it wasn't like developed into full blown asthma or anything. So that was
Wonderful. So very big impact that
yeah, and our
decision.
youngest ended up not having any issues. Didn't have to get an inhaler at all. Where I think that's the direction that he was going in as well. So
And in Hong Kong, do most children have them? Is it just kind of a norm?
A lot of children definitely have them, and I mean China's even worse
Yeah.
because the air quality in China it can be extremely bad. I mean, really high particle.
So I want everyone to hear all about the transition for the 6-year-old. And I'm also curious because that's the time in children's language acquisition and learning that they stop becoming a sponge and start becoming a little bit more analytical. So I love that you took her. They start, like you said, having, an output as opposed to just taking it in.
Right.
And so for that first year for you, I like to ask people, for that first year, from 1 to 10, what would you score it? So 1, it was the hardest year of my life. 10, it was super easy. Like, what was that first year?
Oh, boy. I would say that for us, it was probably an 8.
Okay, so pretty
positive, more positive than I think we expected, because we were fortunate. The school situation in Singapore is similar to Hong Kong. Very difficult to get your children into the international schools.
Oh, wow.
At least it was. I'm not sure because we've been away from that for a while, but it was an issue there. And
just space, waiting lists.
Yeah, they did not have the space, and so it was difficult. But we got fortunate that my daughter was accepted into the Singapore American School.
Great.
So it was the American school system there, and it was a great school. So
great.
I mean, it made it so much easier for her because she really enjoyed it. They had such a great campus. I mean, the food, all the things that children think about. But the education level was really good too. So that made it easy, and that, of course, took a lot of the pressure off my wife. Because she had the other 2 kids at home that she was trying to manage through that time.
How would you compare it to the score of giving that first year in Hong Kong with just you and Beverly?
I'd probably score it higher. Hong Kong would have been maybe a 6 or a 7, and that's because just the challenges of learning a new job, a new company. And at the time, the company was fairly small. I think there was only 7 offices in Asia in 4 countries. 3 offices in China, and then also I think it was in Singapore, Thailand, and Hong Kong. So it was a challenging time because the company was really at a transition point, I would say.
Yeah. So really like on the peak of growth and change.
Yeah. And there was a lot of decisions to be made, really immersed into the business development and building that team. So it was, learning about the culture of a company, I think from a working spouse's standpoint, I think was a challenge. And of course, worrying about your trailing spouse who is, home while you're maybe working 12, 14 hours a day.
Oh, wow, Robert. Yeah.
Working on their own. So, I mean, or she's living on her own. So, I think that was more of a challenge, but at the same time, it was still exciting. We took opportunities to travel a little bit, even in the first year, just to kind of experience. Went to Macau, went
Wow.
to Hainan Island up in China. I think we went, and just little trips, but it was good.
And was Beverly not working when the two younger kids were younger? Tell us a little bit about how you guys found a way to be successful with the little kids as an expat.
Right. So she was working full time leading up to our first, and then she went back to work, and then we had a domestic helper that was living. We decided to have live with us, so we had
Absolutely.
accommodation for her and everything. So that made it a little bit better. Beverly could go to work.
More
and,
hands, more.
Yeah, and not worry about having to drop off the kids or having a sitter or whatever. And so we were fortunate that we had a good helper at the time. And then after the second child, she went back to work to Deloitte and was finding it really difficult. I think with the two kids at home, I think she felt like she probably needed to be home more than she needed to be working. And that was true. I mean, I think it's important if you can do that. And I think we were in a position where we could manage to do that at the time and allow one of us to really be the primary caregiver, for your child at that young age.
Yeah.
So yeah, she stopped working after being there for about, she went back to work and maybe working for 2 or 3 months, and then decided that it just wasn't the best thing for us. So then she didn't work the whole time we were in Singapore. She got a little bit more involved with doing some volunteer stuff, being involved with the school, and managing the household. And I traveled a lot in my job, so it meant that it was important that she was home and could focus on the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that teamwork. It sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was. I think we're fortunate that we both kind of are in alignment, with what's important for the family. And I mean, I've been very lucky in having a great job over the years, that allowed us to do that. And I know a lot of people aren't in that same situation, but yeah, that worked out really well for us. Singapore was great. Beverly actually really enjoyed Singapore. The outdoor, the parks and the reserves and places to walk were fantastic. She made a good network of other friends that had young children the same age, and so it was a good social situation for her, I think.
That's lovely. And tell us, because you have done some really large moves in your life, and in very different ways. One single, one married with kids. I mean, it's unusual to get all three aspects of moving, and which is why I wanted to chat with you here. Going back to our chat 40 minutes ago about picking people for assignments, what do you think are the top 3 characteristics for a successful long-term expat? And when I say long-term, 2 years, not just a couple of months, but truly having to live there, right? Putting their kids in schools, getting jobs there for the spouse, possibly not a quick trip.
Right. Well, I mean, I think one of the things that you would think the first benefits or beneficial qualities would be the language skills, just because it could be helpful for sure. And I think that is the case. But myself, where I don't have the language skills, I don't think it's necessary. I think it is helpful. Depends on what the role is, but it's not necessary. So in my mind, I think it's a certain personality type. So I think some people are very open to sit back and do more observations and listen and kind of learn the culture before they really dive in and start saying things that maybe will not be proper for that setting.
So absorbing before putting their ideas on the situation.
Being a good listener, right? And being very a good observer. So you're willing to step back and not make assumptions on what you think it's going to be like. You get there, experience it, and then establish, your understanding of that culture. And I think certain people just don't allow that to happen. They go into the situation like they're in their home country. Or I can tell you, having lived on both coasts, you can go into one, city and act the same way you did in your origin city, and it will be completely unwelcomed in that setting.
Oh, yes. You did go coast to coast. It's so true. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Or even north to south, because being from the Boston area and then coming down to North Carolina and being in the South, of course, it's completely different, as is Texas, where you're living, right?
Yes. I did Oklahoma to Boston at 18, and it was another language as well. It was English, but it was a lot of phrases I hadn't heard before and a lot of ways of being I hadn't experienced. So absolutely.
Right. So being open-minded, right? Going into that situation with an open mind. Don't allow your preconceived notions or things that you've seen on, the media or movies or anything else influence how are you going to go into that new situation, right? Experience it yourself. Allow yourself to be immersed in that culture. And there's certain people that can do it and certain people that cannot. And I think that was one of the warning signs that we saw overseas when we met with expats or potential expats. They're the ones that want to join, like if it's an American, they want to join the American club. They go straight from their building, which is mostly Americans, to their American club, and then their kids are going to the American school, and they don't experience that culture of being in Hong Kong at all. I think that is almost like a recipe for disaster, because it's just a matter of time before there's going to be some unhappiness with the family unit, and the individual needs to understand the culture in order to really be successful in that culture. From a working perspective as well. And, that's not 100% for everybody, but I think it definitely is one of those things that you want to look for when trying to make sure that an individual is going to be the right fit for that role. What would be another?
So open. So I call it kind of like the bubble. And I always like to let people know, we actually talked about this yesterday because someone said, is it only Americans and British that do this? I don't think so. I think that's why we have Japanese neighborhoods in Dallas. We have Indian neighborhoods in Dallas. We have Vietnamese neighborhoods. Like people, I think most people, the human nature, right, is to be with the people like them.
Right. That's true.
Yeah. And so we have to your point, see which people are going to step out of that comfort zone and bubble and integrate and try to understand a little more, right?
Right. And that would be probably the second point, is if there's a family involved. If it's a single person, obviously you don't have to worry about it. But if there's a family involved, then how much buy-in do you have from that family? I mean,
great.
Just because the individual is willing to take an assignment and seems like a good fit doesn't necessarily mean that the family that's going to be accompanying that working spouse is going to feel the same way, right? So that would be another thing that I think is worth the investment. And I mean, we've done it in the past where we've set up a LinkedIn call or a video call with the children.
Interesting. So, I was going to say, how do you figure that out if the family has buy-in? So tell us what you did. And this will be our last little question.
Okay. So in our case, we actually set up a call with an individual. I think he was working for Pratt Whitney or something. And he had two kids that were a little bit older than our children, but really didn't think that they were open to making that big move from the United
Yeah.
States to, at the time we were living in Singapore.
Yeah.
So we kind of agreed that we'd set up a call and let them have a conversation where we weren't involved in it at all, just so they can have a better understanding from other kids that are in the school system and
Oh,
everything else.
great.
And so they did that, and the family ended up taking the assignment. The children they were prepared with like notebooks and questions of, about the school,
Amazing.
about the country, about travel. I mean, they really were well prepared for this conversation. And we just sat and watched while our children had a conversation. They laughed and they got to know each other a little bit. And
Wow.
through the course of that discussion, the kids, and we know this from the employee of that company, that after, the kids were actually, not only were they 100%, excited about it, they were totally bought into the move and the adventure of
Wow.
going to another country. So, because our kids talk about things that we wouldn't even think about,
Absolutely.
the zoo in Singapore. They talked about that for 10 minutes.
They got them excited about what they might see.
Yes. So it was a great exercise. And I think if companies could do that,
Great idea.
That would be huge without the expense of flying an entire family to that country to visit. It might be more beneficial to actually set that up. And I've tried to kind of do that. It's very difficult to do. We just happen to be lucky that our kids were kind of in that same age group. I mean, I think maybe 4 years difference or something, but it was a great, and they ended up being friends with our kids and everything. So it was great.
I think that's amazing. I have never heard anyone say that they made a kid date like that, right, and allowed that. That's amazing. Yeah.
I mean, as a company or as an employee that's going to be relocating, to have your family excited about the move instead of, I hate you, you're taking me away from all my friends.
Yeah.
I mean, everything that can come out, with a child, it really was, I think, a huge relief for that working spouse that had an opportunity, with taking a position in a foreign country, that he definitely was hesitant to take based on the initial reaction from the family, right?
No, absolutely. And I mean, I think it just takes some organization and kind of crowdsourcing of the employees, right? Like they would just kind of need to get that kind of volunteer mentality of, hey, is anyone there willing to talk with this person who's thinking of moving? Does anyone have kids around the same age? And like you said, it might not always work out, but it's certainly worth the email or the crowdsourcing of the employees. So, all right, Robert, I have so many more questions, but I know that our hour is up, unfortunately. I just want to say thank you so much. You have such a unique story, like I said, from so many perspectives of single, married, with kids, and now you're back in the US. And like I said, I'm so excited. I'm so curious, like how the kids, like they didn't grow up in the US. So I have so many more questions, but maybe we'll have a round 2.
I was going to say, we can have a part 2 because we still had another move to Malaysia before moving back here.
Okay. So let's do, in the summer, I'll have John reach out to you again and we will do a part 2. And remember, John's going to reach out to your daughter. So we are excited to learn that kid's perspective as well from all these moves. So Thank you again for your time. And it's just been an absolute delight.
I enjoyed it as well. So I look forward to the next one, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Micah.
Thanks, Robert. Bye, everyone. And everyone, I wanted to say, reminder, we have a Spanish for HR class that we're doing for free. It's every other Wednesday at 11 Central. If you would like to sign up, please go to the Fluency Corp LinkedIn or Micah Bellieu for the LinkedIn. And then we also have an English for Business classes. And the same thing, my LinkedIn or the Fluency Corp LinkedIn. All of this is free, just helping our community with language. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.